Thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and that's EPIC, Educating for Palliative and End-of-Life Care in Oncology, that acronym. It's a pleasure for Jill and I to be with you this morning, those of you here and those of you across the community, to talk about a very important topic for all of us, advanced care planning. As mentioned, I'm with the Advanced Care Planning in Canada project, and just a little bit of background for you so you know where this is all coming from. This project is a partnership between the Canadian Hospice Palliative Care Association and CareNet, which is a network of researchers in end-of-life care. It's a national project, so we're overseen by an interprofessional national advisory board that includes all the health professionals as well as the legal profession, the Canadian Bar Association, researchers, experts in advanced care planning, and community members. And so we take our advice and our guidance from this group. We've had a variety of sources of funding for this initiative over the years. And our goals are very lofty. Our goals are to raise awareness among the public and among professionals about advanced care planning, its importance, and to provide them with some tools so that they can engage in advanced care planning. So I'd like to start by just talking briefly about what we mean by advanced care planning so that we're all on the same page, because a lot of the research has demonstrated that there's a lot of misconception of what planning is. So it's a process. First and foremost, it's a process. It's not a one-time thing. It's not one form. It's not a series of tick boxes. It's a process where we reflect on our values and our wishes. It includes the communication of those wishes, and as we all know, they can be communicated in a variety of ways, verbally, written, video, any way that people communicate. But the important thing is that we communicate them now when we're capable. It's a way to let others know our future health and personal care wishes. And very importantly, it's a way to determine and engage the person that will speak to us on our speak for us on our behalf if we become incapable. So our substitute decision maker. So as I said, it's best viewed as a process. It's not one event. It starts with a series of conversations. It encourages a dialogue. And the dialogue is among many people, family members, substitute decision makers certainly, but healthcare providers, and sometimes it includes conversations with lawyers. And the ultimate result is a sharing of wishes. And as I said earlier, it's not one document or a checklist. And the important thing that we need to understand in the context of Ontario law is that it's an expression of wishes. It's not consent to treatment or refusal of medical treatment. It's an expression of wishes that can guide decisions in the future.
One of the reasons this is such a big issue is that often we do have the ability to anticipate and understand that death is potentially imminent, but often we don't have sort of detailed guidelines that we don't know. If someone has a predictably progressive disease like cancer or progressive neurodegenerative disease, you may be able to anticipate death, and that's when we tend to have these conversations. Someone gets diagnosed with a metastatic cancer or a very advanced disease. But many other diseases have less predictable courses, and that makes it much harder to time these conversations if you're trying to do them near end of life, and why it's so important to do them early. Things like end-stage heart and lung failure have a very gradual decline, but with periodic, quite steep declines, and often one of those steep declines will end up being irreversible. So if each time you anticipate that decline is going to be reversed again, then sometimes these conversations are never had. And we know in our frail elderly, they again have a little bit of a fluctuating course, but they often have a much gradual, and so people get lulled into this sense of security and never really jump into these conversations because there's always a sense, well, there'll be time, there'll be a next time. But we never quite know when we're going to run out of those times, so best to do them early, especially in things like dementia, where this is a person's capable wish, so you have to involve them and include them. This can't be done by a substitute decision maker or the family later in the person's life, so we have to tackle it early on. And how people are going to weigh these issues is going to vary a lot from person to person. It varies with culture, it varies with background and history. For some people, just being alive, they want healthcare providers, they will accept anything that is offered to them for healthcare because they want any possible opportunity to extend their lives. But other people, that sense of maintaining control of their body, having control of the decisions and what happens is more important to them. For healthcare providers, we're often very torn between our sense of responsibility of doing what's best for the patient, doing the good thing, and avoiding harms. But in many situations, that becomes very gray and sticky. At what point does actually offering the next treatment do more harm than good? Are we putting the patient through suffering or things that they might not want to do? And if we don't have any guidance or input from them, it can be very hard for healthcare providers to make those judgments. So it helps to have some guidance from the patient. And we also have issues of justice and fairness. Can we offer services, what is being done for everybody equally? Can we treat everybody equally and be fair within our healthcare system? And the issues of resource allocation aren't directly related to advanced care planning, but often are a bit of an underlying sort of hidden curriculum to a lot of the discussions about healthcare near end of life. The general standard in Ontario and Canada and most Western cultures is that it's very personal autonomy driven. People have the right to control the decisions about their own body, to accept and refuse health care. They have the right to refuse medical treatment. They have the right to request that a medical treatment be withdrawn or not initiated. And they can provide guidance to their decision makers for decisions that may come up that obligate the healthcare providers to offer those services. So they may say, I want a brain transplant in their advanced care plan. It doesn't obligate healthcare providers to offer it, but it guides their decision makers to make decisions once a treatment plan is proposed, whether this is something the person would consent to or not consent to. So it's guiding the substitute decision maker, and the substitute decision maker is obligated to consider those wishes if they've been expressed. So they have to listen to them based on our legal standards. So if someone has said, I don't want a feeding tube, I don't want to be maintained on life support, and their substitute decision maker is asking us to implement those services, if we know that that's been an advance wish, they really have to convince us that somehow this context is different, or theoretically we should be advocating for our patients to make sure their advance wishes are being respected. For a lot of us, the issue of capacity becomes the difficult one. Well, who's a capable adult, and when are they capable wishes? And especially as people are ill, as they become more frail, if they have issues with cognitive disorders either near end of life, medication-induced delirium, or with dementias, it can be much harder for us to determine what's a capable wish, what's not capable wish, what is coming in. And capacity is not all or nothing. So a person may be capable to make a decision about antibiotics, but not capable to make a decision about chemotherapy or a complex surgery. So we often tend to label people as capable or not capable, and really it's our responsibility as healthcare providers to assess for each treatment that we're offering and getting consent for. Depends on the particular issue, and it depends on the time of day. I remember when I was doing hospital rounds, I always did them before my office in the morning, but sometimes you were waking people up, or they'd had a sleep medication the night before, so they were still kind of groggy and confused. If the only time I'm assessing their ability to make a decision is at a time when I know they're, half groggy and I've just woken them up, I'm not being fair and I'm not offering them the optimal chance to express their wishes. And that's part of our responsibility as healthcare providers to, if we know there's a time of day that's better, to make an effort to assess the most capable time. And until there's some reason to be suspicious, we're assuming that every adult is capable. But in Ontario, we don't have an age of consent. So people who aren't adults, for younger teenagers, we have to assess it on a case-by-case basis. But an adult, unless they give us some reason to think they're not capable, the assumption is that people are. It often comes up when they disagree with us, which is one of the sad things, that we tend to assume people are capable as long as they're agreeing with what the healthcare team wishes. As soon as they disagree, they say, maybe they're not capable, maybe we better assess their capacity. But really we have to be a little bit careful. And communication cannot be used as a measure of capacity, and that's a real problem. Sometimes it's a language issue. They don't speak the language of the healthcare team, and so we tend to defer. We speak to family, we speak to other people, we don't go back to the patient directly, we don't get an independent translator. If they have hearing or vision problems that may interfere, if they've had a stroke and have a language problem, but they may have their cognition intact, we often don't make all of the efforts, and our healthcare system is not often set up to allow us to explore their capacity. But the way they communicate alone shouldn't be used as a determination of incapacity. Just because they can't communicate with us the way we communicate doesn't mean they're incapacity. Because if we declare them incapable, the mental right of the patient to maximize their ability. And the issue of the capacity is not whether it appears to be a reasonable choice or whether it's going to put them at risk. We don't have to agree with the decision, but they have to be able to understand the critical information about the treatment that's being presented and appreciate the consequences of either accepting the treatment or opting to forego them. So we can disagree with the treatment, but we have to test as healthcare providers they understand. And again, if we do that and we find out they're not capable, then having an advanced care plan really helps us shape, okay, well, when they were capable, what would they have wanted us to do to guide them? So in Ontario, the purpose is to enhance autonomy, and advanced care planning is to do that, because if a person is found to be incapable, previously expressed wishes, while they're capable, need to be respected by their substitute decision makers and the healthcare team. So this is a way of protecting our own autonomy down the road for ourselves, and encouraging family members to do this process helps protect their independence and their autonomy down the road should they not be able to do it for themselves. And it doesn't come into play while they're capable, because we often see that, well, you can talk to me, I'm their power of attorney, or you can tell me about that, I'm their substitute decision maker. And often, sometimes substitute decision makers will try to influence healthcare decisions when the patient is capable, but they're not allowed to do that. And again, we also have to protect our patients, because I think one of the reasons sometimes people are afraid to do this is that they're afraid other people will start to interfere with their healthcare decisions. This is only for when they're not able to do it themselves, and we have no right to be going to their substitute decision makers. And Louise already talked about it. It doesn't have to be expressed in writing. It can be in any form at any time, and the later wishes prevail. So people are allowed to change their mind over time, and what you're going to decide when you're 25 and 45 and 65 may change. What you decide when you're in good health maybe, or think you would decide when you're in good health, may change as people adapt to changes in their health, changes with age. Humans are very adept, often find good quality of life in situations where when they were 18 they would have thought it would be unbearable.
So in Ontario, advanced care planning is actually of the Consent and Capacity Act. It's part of the law of informed consent. And as we've said a number of times now, but it's critically important that a patient's wishes are only relevant when they become incapable. Their wishes are interpreted by their substitute decision maker, not the healthcare practitioner. So as healthcare providers, we are obliged by the law to turn to the substitute decision maker if we're looking for consent for treatment or refusal for their interpretation previously expressed wishes. Therefore, informed consent from the person, obviously, if they're capable, or from the substitute decision maker. And consent is always related to the specific context, the treatment or care that's required in that specific context at that time and place, according to the patient's current condition.
In Ontario particularly, and the issue about how the Advanced Care Directive varies from province to province. So if you're outside of Ontario, that can be a little different. In some provinces, a written advanced directive is followed regardless of what the substitute decision maker thinks. It has power in and of its own. In Ontario, it's intended to guide the substitute decision maker. So if you're working outside of Ontario, you have to check the rules of your particular jurisdiction. The Speak Up campaign has links to the different provincial rules. So that's one thing to be important of, that these rules vary from place to place quite a bit. But we've already been this. The edges of capacity are where we tend to run into trouble, people with dementia. And so those are the ones that we have to be really capable. We're assessing capacity and trying to maximize it. And substitute decisions are held to different standards than the person themselves. I'm allowed to make what may be an unsafe decision for myself, or what healthcare providers may consider an unsafe decision. I can decide to refuse an appendectomy if I can understand the consequences of that. As a substitute decision maker for somebody else, there's a good chance I'm not going to be allowed to do that unless they've been very explicit somewhere, probably in writing, saying under no circumstances ever do an different standards. They're guided by, they have to follow advanced capable wishes, but then best interests becomes the next guiding plan, and that looks at their wishes, but also all sorts of other issues around what's in the patient's best interest. So a substitute decision maker has different guidance. The advanced care planning is the first. So any advanced capable wishes that they know of need to guide their decisions, and then after that it becomes really that balance of risk and benefit, what they think is in the person's best interests.
So why is this important, and why are we placing so much emphasis on advanced care planning now? In 2012, we did an Ipsos Reid poll that looked at what people knew about, understood, and to what extent they were involved in advanced care planning. And in Ontario, and this poll was representative of the population of adults 18 and over, 86% of Ontario adults didn't know or hadn't heard of advanced care planning, and you know, that may matter or not matter, depending on whether or not they know what it means. But less than half had had a discussion with a family member or a friend about their wishes for health care and personal care in the future if they could not communicate. And very concerning, only 10% had spoken to a healthcare provider about their wishes. And again, less than half, 48%, had chosen a substitute decision maker that could speak on their behalf if they became incapacitated. This is a very important Canadian study that's going on right now, and Ottawa is actually engaged in this research. The ACCEPT study is looking at advanced care planning experiences of patients and families who have been admitted to hospital, and it's a very specific population of frail elderly Canadians who are admitted to hospital. So the average age is around 82 or 83. These are vulnerable people who are on this admission. There's a high, the expectation that they could die is high. So this is a very vulnerable population. And 3/4 of these people, of these patients, had thought about life-sustaining treatments that they may or may not want. So they're thinking about these things. 85% of those who had thought about it had actually spoken to somebody about their wishes, about their concerns, and 70% of them had designated formally a substitute decision maker. So this population of people themselves are thinking about their wishes and the future. But only 30% had spoken to their family doctor about their wishes. And very worrisome, when they were on their hospital admission, only 25% of these patients were asked by anybody if they had actually had prior discussions with anybody about their wishes. And what does the research tell us? This is just a very brief summary slide of what we know are the benefits of advanced care planning. So if people engage in advanced care planning, it's more likely that their wishes will be known, and more importantly, that those wishes will in fact be followed. Through the course of their illness and through their end of life, their family members experience significantly less stress and depression, and this appears obvious to us because people, if they have had discussions about wishes, they feel more confident when they're called upon to make decisions towards the end of life. Patients are more satisfied, their families are more satisfied, substitute decision makers are more satisfied. And it's been demonstrated that patients who engage in advanced care planning are likely to have fewer life-sustaining procedures and lower rates of admission to ICU towards the end of their life. and they have a better quality of living and dying towards the end of their life. And also, it is less costly to the healthcare system towards the end of their life. This slide, and you'll have access to these slides after the presentation, shows you some of the key references that document these findings that I've just explored.
And one of the key things that people worry about when they see things like less ICU admissions and less cost is like, oh, well, we're just letting people die quicker. But actually, the data doesn't support that people are dying more quickly with that. There is no difference in lengths, and generally in the studies, in lengths of survival. In fact, some of them seem to show that people may live longer with less aggressive intervention. So it's not like we're actually, oh, well, we're just going to kill them off earlier and that'll make it better by doing this. It actually doesn't shorten life having these discussions. It just changes the quality and the approach to care.
So then the main objective of advanced care planning, because remember, these are conversations hopefully early on about wishes and values. The main objectives is to prepare patients themselves and also their substitute decision makers to be able to be decisionally ready when the time comes that they have to make decisions about goals of care or about consenting to treatment. And there's Rebecca Sidore, who's a researcher in the States, is doing some interesting research now looking at levels of behavior change, the process that we move through in changing behavior, the same kind of research that's been used to guide the work that's been done around smoking and that kind of thing, to see how people move along the process of making decisions about their care. This slide really is intended to show sort of the progression from advanced care planning through goals of care and consent and refusal of treatment. So advanced care planning is the first box, the green box with the red bracket around it, where we have conversations about values and wishes, where we decide on our substitute decision maker. And then the yellow box on the other end uses those prior expressed wishes, either by the patient or the substitute decision maker, to make more in the moment relevant to the specific situation that patients are in with regards to goals of care. So remember, central to advanced care planning is the conversation to discuss wishes with families. And I'll provide later on the URL for the resources for the Speak Up campaign, but we've developed a video called Conversations that really has patients, family members, physicians, nurses talking about why it's important to have these conversations, how it's not easy necessarily to have these conversations, but what it means to them personally. So the Speak Up Ontario, because we have a campaign that's very specific to Ontario, again, is an initiative to promote advanced care planning. We've developed some tools that are specific to the Ontario context. They're available on the web portal through the link directly to Ontario that people can use to do advanced care planning and that healthcare professionals can use to support their patients. And we do this in partnership with Hospice Palliative Care Ontario and the End of Life Care Network. So the target audiences of the campaign are community organizations, healthcare providers, the general public. And the umbrella message of this campaign is focused on the conversation. Overall, this is a national campaign. We have some specific Ontario resources. And as Jill mentioned earlier, when it comes to writing advanced directives or specifically formally designating a substitute decision maker, the laws vary across the country. But there's two important things that transcend all borders, and that's having the conversation about values and wishes and deciding who your substitute decision maker will be, engaging them in that process, and having the conversation with them. So we have a website, it's easy, advancedcareplanning.ca, where you can have access to tools specifically for yourselves and for your patients and families, as well as for our other target audiences. Now we have a specific Ontario toolkit on the website, and we have, first of all, we have an Ontario workbook that enables people to work through the process of advanced care planning. So it guides them interactively, asks them questions, they can write down their answers. If they want to do it in hard copy, they can type in their answers. If they want to do it on their computers, but they can think about what's right for them, their values, beliefs, and goals, asks them a few questions, open-ended questions, to help them consider those things, gives them some opportunity to learn about healthcare options and medical procedures, generally in the workbook, but guides them to ask their healthcare professional about the specific medical procedures that will relate to their own condition. They can determine who their substitute decision maker will be. Now remember, in Ontario, we all have a substitute decision maker by law, and it's based on a hierarchy that goes through a variety of people. But if the first person on my list is my partner, and if I don't want my partner as my substitute decision maker, I need to formally designate in a power of attorney for personal care who I do want as my substitute decision maker. So the workbook explains that to people so that they understand it. It helps them begin the conversation. They can write down some of the things they're thinking, and it encourages them to review their plan. So the workbook is not, as we've said, it's not a medical directive. It's an expression of an advanced care plan that they can use with their substitute decision maker, with their family, share it with their healthcare professional so that people understand what their wishes are. And the workbook helps people to clearly determine, think about what they're looking for in a substitute decision maker. The person has to be capable of honoring their wishes and making their decisions, and the law determines what that capability is, and the workbook describes that simply for people. It describes, as I said, the process of power of attorney for personal care and the hierarchy. One of the tools that we've developed for healthcare professionals, and this directly came as a result of the ACCEPT study that I mentioned earlier, is a card. We call it the Just Ask Conversation card. There's another study going on parallel to ACCEPT that's called the DECIDE study that looks at advanced care planning from the perspective of healthcare providers. And one of the barriers to doing advanced care planning is not feeling equipped with what people need to start the conversation. So this is a wallet card. It's on a pocket card. It's on the website. You can download it. For those who are in the theater today, I brought a few that are on the table outside for you to take away. And it just gives some trigger questions that people can ask when they're first engaging with patients. So, what do you understand about your illness or what's happening to you? Do you have an advanced care plan? Do you know what I mean by those terms? Have you talked to your substitute decision maker or anyone else about your wishes? And then there's also questions that we can ask ourselves as healthcare providers. Did I ask my patient about their preferences and wishes, and do I know who to contact? The other important toolkit that we've developed for healthcare providers is a primary care toolkit, and this came as a result of being approached by healthcare providers who said, we want to do this. It can be very time consuming. We need some quick and easy things that we can use in our practices to start the process so that our patients can have these conversations with their family and their substitute decision maker. So this toolkit has an infographic that someone could put on their office wall that basically gives the 5 steps of advanced care planning and tells their patients to talk to their doctor or their nurse practitioner about it. There's handouts that are, again, based on the Ontario workbook that very simply tell people what the process is, what a substitute decision maker is. There's simple information about power of attorney for personal care so that people can understand what that is. And then there's a template that people can use to express wishes if that's useful for them. The other parts of the Speak Up campaign are really general awareness raising. So as well as providing tools for patients and families and healthcare providers, we do a lot of work in the media and social media. So we're very, very engaged in Twitter and Facebook and YouTube in order to constantly get the message out about advanced care planning. We engage with the traditional media. We run seasonal campaigns. For example, around Thanksgiving, when people are gathered together with families and loved ones, it's a good time to start the conversation. We do something called infographics, which are a simple representation. What's that?
Is it pass the turkey? And by the way, what do you want us to do?
Let's talk turkey today.
Yeah.
And then we've done a couple of videos. One of them is the conversations. Another is a graphic video that doesn't have any words. It just has music. The words are printed on the screen, and people are using that in hospital waiting rooms, in primary care setting waiting rooms. That again raises people's awareness. We blog. We've done PSAs. Actually, Nova Scotia started a campaign this spring, and they took our PSAs, and CBC used it, and I understand we were on Hockey Night in Canada, so that reached a lot of people as well. That's right. Yeah, reached Don Cherry, hopefully. Anyway, and as I said, the message of all of this is have the conversation and think about who will speak for you. And we're really trying to normalize these conversations. We've had some blogs done by young people as well who talk about, you know, when we think about advanced care planning, it's not just for older people. None of us know what the future brings, so we need to think about these and have these conversations early on. This is just an example of one of our infographics. Have you got the ostrich syndrome, your head in the sand about advanced care planning?
And one of the things I like, this is a quote, it is the uncertainty that causes conflict. So if you don't know what people want, you don't know how to decide, you get a lot more stress and a lot more conflict. You get conflict in families if you don't know. So if you have 6 children trying to decide about what mom would want, it's really going to help avoid conflict amongst those 6 kids if mom's given some guidance, even if she hasn't named a substitute decision maker. So by doing advanced care planning, we can reduce some of that uncertainty and hopefully reduce some of the decisional conflicts that we face every day. And understanding their wishes and their values can really guide decision making and reduce that uncertainty. Questions, comments? One of the big things is, because a lot of people say, well, it doesn't matter, the hierarchy is going to decide for me, and they don't understand things like if you have 4 children, all 4 of your children are going to have to agree to make those decisions. So these are all things that the campaign really helps bring up to make easier.